Welcome to a fireside in West Sussex on the edge of the Arun Valley. And good evening, Wildflower Society. How lovely to have you with me. I'll just spirit you up onto the Downs to start with. And we're on the top of the South Downs, looking south towards the sea in the distance. And I can pick out for you Arundel Castle. We're going to go down past Arundel Castle in a minute. I'm going to orientate you for those of you who don't know the area very well. Here we are. There's the bottom half of England. Apologies to our northern friends. And you can see that we are not very far from France. And that has a bearing on our flora. And also, I have to say that it has a bearing on my nose, because when the wind is in the right direction on a particularly good day, I'm sure I can spell Boeuf Bourguignon. But botanically speaking, the wind from France carries with it orchid seed, which I'm sure you know is very light. And for a long time now, people have believed that our orchid populations on the South Downs are topped up from over the channel. And 2 years ago, we had an outbreak of lizard orchids in Sussex, and not an outbreak, but one or two lady orchids, more than we usually get. And it's quite possible that these may arise from windborne seed over the channel, although an orchid expert at Kew remarked to Paul Harms, why couldn't they have just blown over from Kent? So something to think about. Zooming in on the county, I've indicated where the River Arun comes out at Littlehampton, and I've got a rather inexpert red line taking you inland from Littlehampton, along the Arun to Arundel, then up to Pulborough.
Sorry, I didn't expect it to be doing things like that. I'm going to have some to eat then, dear.
Jackie, can you mute yourself, please?
Oh, yes.
Don't worry, I'll have something to eat later. Don't worry about me. So we got as far as Pulborough, Billingshurst, and then above that we come to Horsham, and the Arun rises somewhere in hills behind that. Now, we're not going that far today, but I think that stout footwear would be advisable. So a gentle stroll upstream along the River Arun. And here is the title of the talk, just to remind me. Let's go down to the beach. Here we are on the dunes west of the outfall of the Arun, looking across where all that woodwork is. That's where the Arun comes out into the sea. And Climping Dunes are in themselves quite an interesting little site. But let's start on the vegetative shingle. And I hope that you can hear the sea and feel the sun on your faces as we look at the lovely yellow-horned poppy. I find vegetative shingle very interesting. There's the idea that you've got some plants which are happier nearer to the sea, like Babington's arach, which you get just above the high tide line, and others prefer to be just a little bit further in. And of course, they all have their preferences about the sort of shingle that they're vegetating on. Now, one of the toughest of our vegetated shingle species is the rough clover, Trifolium scabrum. This likes compacted shingle in front of the dunes, and it can stand an awful lot of trampling. Very tough little chap. On the other hand, the sea sandwort is less happy with trampling, and it's in fact quite vulnerable to trampling, but it does occur in small patches along the shingle towards the top end of the shingle at these dunes at Climping. The sea campion established itself where there's altogether less disturbance, and you'll find patches of this between the vegetative shingle and those dunes at the place that we call Climping. Moving on to the dunes themselves, they've been colonised in fairly recent years by this hare's tail grass, which is by some strange means moving westwards against the prevailing wind. But there are plenty of native plants on the dunes. One of my favourites is the sea bindweed, Calistegia soldanella, which is quite frequent along these dunes. And slightly scarcer, the sea spurge, which is quite a rare Sussex plant. On the other hand, dunes are quite a rare habitat in Sussex, so to an extent it's relative. There are lots of other interesting plants in the dunes, but we can't spend too long here. There's little robin for one, and all sorts of other things, but I'd like to just show you Silene conica, the sand catchfly, which at Climping is in its only Sussex station. A delightful plant spread all along the dunes there, and no real reason why it shouldn't be elsewhere in Sussex, but no reason I can give you why it isn't. So the dunes on the west side of the River Arun, if you go over the dunes and take a look, you'll see Climping Golf Course, which is an SSSI and has about a dozen very interesting species on it. It's very difficult to get access because golfers seem to be up at the crack of dawn and playing while when it's dark, so it's not easy to get access, but once in a while we can. And one of my favorite little plants here is Viciolatheroides, the spring vetch, which is easy to miss because it's an early season plant. But it likes the sandy conditions there. There's also a Napoleonic War fort, which is being restored. In the distance, you will see the buildings of Littlehampton, and in our stout shoes, this is where we're walking next. Still on the west bank of the Arun, looking across at the main part of Littlehampton, we have a small area of salt marsh. And there are various species there, but this is one of my favorites. You're going to get fed up with me saying favorites, I'm sorry. This is one of my favorites, the purple glasswort, the Salicornia ramosissima, which is relatively easy to distinguish from other glassworts when it colours up very late in the season. If we jump across the river, looking back to where we were and the boat building sheds, you get an idea of the river on a nice day, a nice sunny day. And we're going to walk on, but the alternative might be to take one of these amphibious cars, which are built just over the road there and which you see being tested on the river occasionally. But we have other things which we need to see. And early in the season, again, these two mouse ears appear quite frequently around Littlehampton. And every year I have to remind myself about their crucial differences. On the left, the little mouse ear, Cerastium semidecandrum, and on the right, Cerastium diffusum, the dwarf mouse ear. And they're very common in verges there all along the seafront. On the seafront verges, there are a lot of good plants. If we go now to Banjo Road in Littlehampton, it's only a small diversion from the river. And when I say Banjo Road, disappointingly, it's not called Banjo Road because the musical inhabitants of Littlehampton all turn out there with their banjos. It's called Banjo Road because it's in the shape of a banjo. It's a short road with a circular turning area at the back. And off Banjo Road, there is car park, which has some very nice clovers in it. The pick of the clovers, in my view, is the suffocated clover, which is very resistant to all the cars which park on it. This is quite a niche habitat, this compacted gravel here, which is run over by cars all summer. A more recent arrival is the mossy stonecrop, Passula tilea. This has not long been a Sussex plant, but it's turning up in different places, apparently carried by vehicle tires. And it's something you should, I think, look out for all over the place. It's getting about. Very small plant, but the colour gives it away. So, leaving Littlehampton, back to the river, which, and this stretch is engineered. It's been engineered, the banks have been engineered for many years because it was an important shipping route up to Arundel. On the banks, the commonest plants are the sea couch and sea purslane, but there are others. There's a nice, but not particularly photogenic sedge, Carex diffusa, the divided sedge, in odd patches, quite a local speciality. If you look at the railway bridge in the background, which carries the South Coast rail line across the river, in the top right hand, you'll see that it used to be a drawbridge before the line was electrified because the ships needed to get up to Arundel. These days, tall ships can't sail as far as Arundel, and Littlehampton replaced Arundel as a port in Victorian times. Just beyond the bridge is the medieval church Ford, just at the place where before the riverbanks were engineered, in medieval times, you could, at very low tides, get across. And the settlement, it's scarcely more than a hamlet, bears the name Ford. But we have to move on further up the river, just past the church. We get a prospect of Arundel with the Roman Catholic Cathedral towards the left, the Anglican church in the middle, and the castle on the right. The river winds considerably here, but I think that if you follow me, I think we'll be there quite quickly. Now, when we get to Arundel, if we look at the top of the town hall, we see a rather large wooden swallow. And this is because the town name Arundel is something of a puzzle. It's not the usual case where the town takes the name from the river. The river used to be the Tarrant, and there's still a Tarrant Street in Arundel. It's now called the Arun because of Arundel, and the origin of the place name is disputed. Some will tell you, some people of Arundel will tell you it's because of Arundel, the French for swallow, which was the name of the giant Beavis's horse, the local giant. Every town ought to have a local giant. And this horse, presumably a giant horse, is actually buried in Arundel Park, apparently. The other explanation for the town name is from the Arundel. My Old English is not terrifically good. And that is the dell of the horehound. And the white horehound is the one apparently in question, which occurs fairly frequently in Arundel Park. So Arundel Park, which we'll be visiting quite soon. So you take your pick there. But I'd like to introduce you to a very important past man of Arundel, Frank Penfold. And Frank did an awful lot for conservation. He developed almost founded and developed the Sussex Wildlife Trust. He was a very forthright man, and when asked what he thought about the origin of the town's name, he said something very colourful, which I can't possibly print here. There's Frank at the headquarters of Sussex Wildlife Trust, and you may spot a rather young David Attenborough and a rather young, the evergreen, I may say, David Streeter, known to many of you, I'm sure, through the Collins Wildflower Guide, and I have to say, the distinguished president of the Sussex Botanical Recording Society. I shall mention Frank and David later on when we get to Amberley Wildbrooks. So we're in Arundel, we're on the east bank, looking across by the bridge towards the castle and a medieval priory. And on the right-hand side, I've got a map of Arundel Park with the river running around the bottom and then up the right-hand side. We are going to just leave the river for a bit and we're heading to that lake in Arundel Park. We're going to have a little scratch around Arundel Park. We can't do it justice in a few hours. We can't do it justice in a day or two. It's quite a big park. It's got quite a lot in it, but we're going to start at that lake, Swanbourne Lake. But before we get to the Emst Park from Mill Road, we have scrambling in the hedge by a little cafe, Wild Madder. And I've put in a BSBI distribution map of madder. You'll see that Sussex, apart from an outlier in East Kent, Sussex is the westernmost extremity of this primarily coastal plant. It's not a common plant in Sussex, but if you want to see it, just go to Swanbourne Lake and look in the entrance. Big scrambling relation of goosegrass, as I'm sure you know, with leathery leaves. So we step through the gate. We decline to go in the cafe because there is not time. And the first thing that we see is great fen sedge, Cladium moriscus, on the edge of this very quite sizable but very shallow pond full of water which is very calcareous. This is the only site for great fen sedge in Sussex, and it's not a Sussex plant. We know that it was planted in the 18th century, and a warning about Swanbourne Lake is that the borders of Swanbourne Lake are nothing but a garden. And I have that on the authority of Walter Reeves, who doesn't look a bit like me, in a very interesting periodical, if you can get hold of it, Science Gossip, a late Victorian journal, which is full of little gems. So we have to be a bit careful about Swanbourne Lake because what our friend Walter means is that liberties have been taken with it, and there are exotic plantings. And I know there is at least one very good fig tree right there, but there are native species in there, and there's lots and lots of maretail. In fact, it has to be cleared occasionally, and it's a very pleasant walk to walk by the lake and further into the park. And that's the sort of ground that much of the park is, rather a rough chalk ground. We've got the wild parsnip there, and on the right-hand picture, we've got hemp griminy. But there is some very fine chalk grassland as well. On the broken ground, two plants are fairly frequent. The deadly nightshade, for one, and hound's-tongue for the other. And I don't know whether you all know that if you tear the leaves of hound's-tongue, it has a strange resemblance in odour to the smell of peanut butter. And if you're just dealing with basil leaves, that's a very good ID feature. And I'm sure our friend John Poland knew that. So on the finer chalk grassland, we have what I would call bastard toadflax, but what Ted Pratt would call stars in the grass. And I know Ted Pratt is a great friend of the Wildflower Society. And a few years ago, he appealed to readers of BSBI News to find a politer name for Theseum humifusum, and various suggestions came in, and Ted thought stars in the grass was the best. And I'm a bit of a traditionalist, and I thought, well, no real need to change this. But now I always call it stars in the grass. So there you are. I'm stepping out of botany for a minute. I'm making an appeal on behalf of the dingy skipper. If we can get a prettier name for Theseum humifusum, I would hope that our lepidopterists might find a more flattering name for the dingy skipper, which is a very frequent butterfly in this part of Sussex. I think it's exquisite with this slightly faded Persian carpet look. So if any of you have some good ideas about a better name for dingy skipper, write to a lepidopterist you know. At the far end of the park, if you read a lovely book, I think, Colin The Flowers of Chalk and Limestone, he mentions that in Arundel Park there is stinking hellebore. It's been known there a long time. And the record in Arundel Park goes right back to Gough's edition of Camden, date you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. This is well into the park, and as I say, has been known there for a long time. As far as a Sussex plant is concerned, it's a pretty rare plant, and where it does occur, you wonder whether it's native, in inverted commas, or whether it's a garden escape. It's a plant that's been in and out of gardens for centuries, and certainly in Sussex, I don't think you can ever be sure. But I think we've lingered long enough in Arundel Park. We must leave, and almost as soon as we get back out through the gate by the wild madder, we're confronted by the small teasel, a plant that's not common in Sussex. And you may be wondering why there's that little red box there, and that's because I'm going to put on distribution map from the 2018 Flora of Sussex. And that little red box shows a concentration of dots on the distribution map for small teasel, and it lies right up the Arun Valley. It's very much a local speciality. It's a bee plant, and I've put there for comparison, it's much more familiar relative the common teasel. Dipsacus, the Latin name, means drinker, and I think that probably refers to the pools of water that form in the leaf axils of the common teasel, and which I suspect probably have some benefit for the plant, though I'm not sure anyone has written on it. So small teasel, very much an Arun Valley speciality. While we're looking at the small teasel, on this side of the road, just underneath a cliff, which is in fact the ancient river cliff of the River Arun, and which, had I pointed the camera a little higher, I could have caught lots of box trees in possibly native situation. But we're not looking at the box trees, we're looking at the leaves of scarce lords and ladies, a plant that was first recorded in Britain on the Isle of Wight in only about 1850. There are thousands of plants by the roadside here. This is Mill Road, which runs from Arundel up into the countryside. And unlike the common lords and ladies, the leaves emerge in early October, and they'll be looking much like this now. That's the easiest way to distinguish the scarce lords and ladies from the common lords and ladies. It's when the leaves emerge. There we are on the left, the scarce lords and ladies. You'll see that the leaves are a bit more leathery than the common species. The veins are milky, and there's something about the way that the leaves emerge from the ground that with the trained eye you can distinguish them from the common lords and ladies. Of course, lords and ladies is one of the more polite names for these plants. On the right, for comparison, I put in one of the cultivars that are familiar in gardens of its near relation, Aromatallicum neglectum, subspecies Italicum, which is, I'm sure, familiar to many of you. The native scarce lords and ladies is very much a southern plant. It gets as far as, I think, Glamorgan. Lots of it on the Isle of Wight, lots of it on Purbeck. The spathe is always cream or pale yellow. The fruits slightly larger and more angular than the common lords and ladies. Distribution in Sussex, and again I'm relying on the 2018 Flora of Sussex. The distribution in Sussex is interesting. If you'll see the dots on the orange, that's the coastal plain of Sussex. The green, the South Downs. And the dots that are above the green there, or more or less above the green, they're at the foot of the scarp slope of the South Downs. And there's these two distinct regions of Sussex where the plant is at home. On the north scarp slope of the Downs, they tend to grow at the bottom spring line. And for those of you who are interested in the different dots, I've explained them at the bottom. The small dots are the dots that were produced for the Sussex Plant Atlas, which was published in 1980. The large circles, records that we found during our 2000 to 2016 survey. The empty circles are new records that didn't match ones in the previous publication, and the big dots are tetrads, that's 2 by 2 kilometer squares, in which they were found in both surveys. So I hope that's clear. The Flora of Sussex, a small advertisement for you, contains all 2,750 taxa that have ever been recorded in Sussex. Unfortunately, since 2018, we've got one or two more. So you can't stop nature. Now, the Sussex Botanical Recording Society is, of course, a very serious society. You can see there by our three friends. There's David Streeter there, and my wife in the background. This is a field meeting. This is the sort of dedicated activity we go in for field meetings. So if you want to join, it doesn't matter if you don't live in Sussex. We even have people from Kent. Sorry, Liz. We welcome all comers. So back to the Arun Valley, and here we have a typical winter scene where the ditches have been cleared by tractor. And in winter, the most conspicuous plant on the outskirts of Arundel is the white willow with its very orange twigs. In summer, by one of the commoner sedges in the ditches is the flop sedge, very attractive sedge. If we go behind the rugby club, one of the finest black poplars in Sussex is to be found. And this is a plant that was more or less forgotten about. It's very much a floodplain plant, so I suppose these days it'll be threatened by building. And a lot of work has been done over the last 20 years on the black poplar. And if you want to read about it, there's a very good book by my friends, Francis Abraham and Kate Ryland, which is attainable. I haven't got a picture of Kate, but here's Frances in her trademark pink hat and Wellingtons. A very good book, tells you all you need to know about the black poplar in Sussex. The best black poplar in Sussex is in Midhurst. Now, down by the river here, we come across a medieval herb used in the treatment of leprosy. There are 1 or 2 patches of Lepidium latifolium, Ditander, or its other English name, the broad-leaved pepperwort. And I've got a herbarium sheet there to show you that it is indeed broad-leaved, the basal leaves, which tend to dry up early in the season. Now, this is a little story, a little diversion here. It involves going to Chichester, but we'll be all right if we run. Here in Chichester on the River Lavant, which is a winterbourne, you can see some Ditander, and in the background there's a little thatched cottage, and the plaque, the little thatched cottage, tells you that it was built with the materials salvaged from the leper hospital that was founded in the reign of Henry I. Now, the Ditander here has historical records from the early 1800s, but it's growing the site of a pool in the River Lavant, which was in the hospital garden and where the patients used to bathe. And I think there's very strong circumstantial evidence that the Ditander growing here in Chichester, I say in Chichester, in medieval times, it was a safe mile outside the city walls, but it's, I think that the Ditander there is very likely to have survived when it was cultivated by the monks in the garden. Now, the link up here with Arundel is that these patches of Ditander grow on the medieval track, which leads up from a remote coombe in the Downs called Ivy Coombe, which was a medieval leper colony, and the patients used to make their way down past this spot to a Christian foundation where through the window they would be able to share in the mass. So I do like these historical stories about plants. So a little history, but we must move on. This is about the spot where the Ditander grows, but there's something else here that you might like to see. A very lovely plant, the marshmallow. The river here is, of course, tidal, and it is no longer, the banks are no longer engineered, and in spring there's a profusion of marsh marigolds, what I would call marsh marigolds, what my father-in-law from Yorkshire would call blobs, and I make no comment. My wife, also from Yorkshire, refers to milkmaids rather than ladies' smock. But these, the marsh marigold and the lesser pond sage and the greater pond sage, come to that, are frequent along the banks here of the Arun as we make our way north from Arundel. Just putting in there for you, rather belatedly, the milkmaids and the carex. But let's, as we are all very fit and we've got our stout shoes on, let's go up to the top of the Downs. And about 10 years ago, we had some cornflower here that we think was quite probably from buried seed. The Norfolk estate, based on Arundel, has done a lot of work up here. And if you look at the white trackways, you'll see that there are hedges, in some places double hedges, and wide field margins. And this was work done in order to bring back the grey partridge, but it's also benefited other of our cornland, our arable land birds, which are in trouble, particularly the corn bunting and yellowhammer. And the gentleman who was responsible for this was Dick Potts, late Dick Potts. And there he is standing in one of his arable margins. And I've got a picture of one to the left. They did seed some of these margins with gold of pleasure and with that blue, I won't get the name of it now, but the other plants which have come up from buried seed. Phacelia was what I was thinking of. Yes, Phacelia and gold of pleasure were definitely introduced, but the other arable weeds have come up from seed, and you can see rather scarce arable plants like the leaf spurge and the prickly poppy. You can see the cut-leaved dead nettle. The leaves ever so subtly different from our red dead nettle. And then the lovely Venus's looking glass is not uncommon in some years. Less showy perhaps, but rarer, the narrow-fruited corn salad is there. And when night falls, you see night falling there, we have night flowering catchfly, very sticky plant. So in the Arun Valley, or just above it, we've got some very good arable weeds. But we also have some classic grassland. The two thistles I always associate with the Downs are the nodding thistle, very good bee plant, and the carline thistle. But there is a third one, of course, which I always call the picnickers thistle, and we all know what that is. It's the one you sit on. But enough about that. What about the kidney vetch, very good butterfly plant? There are some very good patches, some very good combs which support this plant and the accompanying butterflies, including the dingy skipper, until we can find a better name. One of my favourites is the Squinancy work with that lovely subtle stripe to the petals. And of course, there is more round-headed rampion in Sussex than anywhere else, and so we have adopted it in the Sussex Botanical Recording Society for our logo. The field fleawort. Now, a lady called Ursula Smith some years ago did a PhD on this, and she postulated an association with ancient trackways and Iron Age sites, which I think is very interesting. It is a plant only about 6 inches tall, as you probably know. Its distribution in Sussex is mainly easterly. Here we have the red arrow there is a record for just above the Arun Valley, which was not refound in time for the 2018 flora, but which Francis Abraham and I found, I think 2 years ago. It's a plant that is more frequent on the eastern downs, and there are quite a few species which have an eastern or a western bias, but there's not time, I think, to go into that here. and the various reasons. David Streeter is always an authority on the ecological preferences of plants, and he's a wonderful resource in the Recording Society. Late summer, we have the chalk eyebright with its large flowers, very floriferous, and the autumn lady's tresses, both of these favouring the sunniest spots. Regarding eyebrights in Sussex, on the downs we have the non-glandular ones, loosely Nemorales, but more often than not Nemorales in conjunction with hybrids with Confusa and Arctica. They're not easy to do. My wife has made a study of them, and it remains, despite the help of our national expert, very kind, very useful help, she remains a bit baffled. And of course, we mustn't leave out the grasses. I'm sure you can identify Brisa media there and some of the others. The main grasses of the finest chalk grassland are meadow oatgrass and downy oatgrass, quaking grass, as pictured, upright brome, also in the picture, sheep's fescue, crested hairgrass, smaller cat's tail, and the yellow oatgrass. We have sedges. The main sedge on chalk grassland is, of course, Carex flacca, the carnation sedge. But on the finest chalk, we have spring sedge, and also the grass Danthonia decumbens, heath grass, which is something of a misnomer on the chalk, but I'm never really sure whether it's on the leached part of the chalk or whether it's just has a preference for the oldest chalk grassland. But there's quite a lot of it on the downs if you know where to look. By the way, if I ever have problems with grasses, I go to Sue Deness, one of your members. She only lives down the road. Another wonderful resource. There's quite a lot of juniper in places on the downs. In fact, I was up on the downs above the Arun with my wife this morning, and we noted quite a lot of it. A very common plant around here, both on the downs and also on the sand in the Arun Valley, the dark mullein, those lovely hairy anthofilaments. But we also get, in much less frequency, the white mullein. And it always has white hairs on the anthofilaments, not to be confused with the white flowered form of the dark mullein. On the right is white mullein. I haven't got a good picture of it growing in the wild. That's growing in our last garden, where it arrived on foot, presumably on someone's foot, someone's stout shoe, and it liked it. The flowers in the wild are never as good as that, I have to say. It's an opportunist. It requires disturbed ground, and its stronghold in Sussex is the Arun Valley. Other odd plants that we find in the Arun Valley, the knapweed broomway, sparingly, and the wild licorice, which is quite a scarce plant. Its most accessible site is opposite the primary school in Bury. It's one of the Arun Valley villages. We are dangerously near the Amberley Chalk Pits Museum, and that's well worth going to, even if you don't like buses. It's got a railway, it's got lots of things. It's my favourite exhibit. It's got a British Telecom, a telephone museum, and there's a picture of a telephone that's been melted by a lightning strike. You know, I'm easily pleased, I suppose. For the botanists, there are 2 nature trails, and it's the best place to see the narrow-leaved everlasting pea. The best place other than the walk to Amberley Wild Brooks, which some of you may know, and some of you may be about to know. The narrow-leaved everlasting pea, a local speciality. Above the Amberley chalk pits, here we have a late friend, late dear friend, Richard Robinson, demonstrating a real local speciality, the fly honeysuckle, which grows in the hedge here and elsewhere above Chalk Pits Museum. It's been known here for a couple of centuries at least. Its status in Sussex is in doubt. Some people will tell you that it's not native, but we Sussex botanists are very possessive about it, and we like to believe it is. We're going to stay with Richard Robinson, who I know was a very popular member of the Wildflower Society. There he is, one of the remoter parts of Arundel Park with Sudaness and Joanna and Julian, who I'm not sure whether they're members. Then on the right at East Head, another fantastic botanical site, Sussex, with my wife, Elizabeth. And of course, in the Sussex Botanical Recording Society, we've got lots of people who are also members of the Wildflower Society. And Dennis Kell gave me this picture of the 2018 AGM. And if we zoom in a bit, you'll see a few SBRS members about to get arrows in their heads. There are others I know who are not here. There's Paul Harms and Helen Dignam, members of the SBRS, and there are other people out there like Lise and Helen Proctor and Jackie and Peter. In fact, loads of you. And there's Richard with the late Mike Shaw. I think Mike Shaw was another member of the Wildflower Society, and a nice picture of Richard with Sue Adams after a hot day's botany at the beach near Shoreham, I think that was. Now, Richard and his wife Jenny chose to move to Amberley, and they made a very wise choice, because if you look in the Sussex flora, which, by the way, I can supply at a discount price. If you look at the Sussex flora, this is the second highest taxa total for a 2 by 2 kilometre square. TQ01G, 598 taxa. And this is partly because there's such a big variety of habitats there, and including top and bottom, good portions of the River Arun. And you'll see a museum there, that's the Arundel Chalk Pits Museum. The village itself of Amberley has lots of botanical interest in it. And here's the flora of Sussex, 498,000 records, 1,053 tetrads. But the highest total score is 818, and this is from a square in Hove. Lots and lots of aliens, and the man responsible for the 818 total is Tony Spears, who is quite famous in Hove for walking around gutters looking for birdseed aliens. And I think, in fact, Tony's got one leg longer than the other now. But he is a formidable and very helpful botanist. So there you are. I hope I've whet your appetite if you haven't got a copy of the Flora of Sussex. So Richard and Jenny moved into Amberley village, and that's a view up to the Downs, where we've just been. And that, I think, is the oldest post box I've ever seen at 1637. But if you're not interested in post boxes, you might be interested in the Polypody. That is Western Polypody, which is a very unusual Sussex plant, but there is more of it around Amberley, I think, than anywhere else in Sussex, including on Richard's front wall. And because you weren't paying attention when we were in the dunes at Climping, you missed the intermediate polypody, which grows there. And you see, I've helped you out there by going back all the way to Climping, just on the edge of the golf course. Those two unusual, well, unusual for Sussex, polypodies. Well, that's what Amberley Wildbrooks looks like at the moment. Diagonally through the picture, that's the main north to south footpath. The Wildbrooks were actually saved by that Frank Penfold and David Streeter. They spearheaded the move to save Wildbrooks from draining in the 1970s. So we should be very grateful to them. And it is a wonderful botanical hotspot. We haven't got time to do it justice today. There, when it emerges in spring, there's a wonderful profusion of tussock sedges. I've heard very, very recently, I've heard grasshopper warblers just there in the middle of the Wildbrooks. One of the common river valley species here, the water chickweed, those bluish tinged anthers. And a speciality of this part of the Arun Valley, the parsley-leaved water dropwort, a plant which goes through its life cycle very quickly, and so it's in seed by the time the hay meadows are cut. Right, we're drawing to the end now. I hope your feet aren't too sore. There we are, Ananthes ciliifoli. One of the prizes, of course, of the Wildbrooks is cutgrass, the azure, and there's Richard and Sue and Francis again, very near one of the good patches of cutgrass. Francis, by the way, believes that beyond Sussex, cutgrass was spread by barges carrying hay. It is, of course, virtually unknown these days outside Sussex, and a real speciality of the Wildbrooks. Now, I'm not going to be able to show you, I'm afraid, the specialities of the Wildbrooks, but the good news is that there is a Wildflower Society meeting planned 2024, led by two intrepid members of the Wildflower Society. There's Sue Adams and equally intrepid Sue Dennis. And I'm sure that will be a very interesting meeting with two people with whom it's a great pleasure to be in the field. So something to look forward to, and something possibly other to look forward to, the end of my tour. Apart from, have we got time for some orchids, or shall I close?
Well, you can just show us these. What's this, Nick?
I was just showing you David Lang and his book, now out of print, on wild orchids of Sussex. We lost David a few years ago, but the Arun Valley, or the slopes of the Arun Valley, are good for orchids too. We've had in recent years, apart from the frog orchid on the right and the common spotted orchid on the left, we've had the hybrid, those which, when I saw one in my teens in Hampshire, I was told was a once in a lifetime plant. I'm very glad it wasn't, because I didn't have my camera the first time. But that's not my photograph, that's Andy Bertram's. Dactyloglossum mixta. We have on the downs above the Arun, we have fly orchid and bee orchid. And a few years ago, we had the hybrid Ophrys cross Peachii. This isn't my photograph, but this is a photograph by a legend, I should say, of the Sussex Botanical Recording Society, and I think a legend of the Wildflower Society, Arthur Hoare, a great friend of mine. And I leave you with a mystery, the red helleborine. Is it a Sussex plant? In 1910, several plants were seen on a bank outside a garden in Houghton, which is just outside Amberley. In 1921, a man called Edelstein from Gloucester saw the cut stems of the plant in the hands of a woodcutter near Poling. That's just a little bit further from Arundel. And in 1991, a photograph was taken apparently from a wood near Arundel. But we have had no confirmation of any of these records. So a little mystery. Thank you for your company on the Ramble. I'm thinking about a little bit of Bourguignon and a little bit of red wine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.